They were the heroes from the future, teenagers protecting the universe from those that would sow the seeds of chaos. Each had unique powers and abilities, and though they often had their differences, they came together to save the day as the Legion of Superheroes. Now you can be a part of their adventures and learn the history of the future in the Legion Clubhouse.
I don't know what the heck is going on this week in the Legion Clubhouse, Matthew, but Mordru is back.
I'll tell you what's going on. I got 2 words for you. First word, Carrie. Second word, Bates.
Superboy number 173, Trust Me or Kill Me. Published April 1971. Written by Carrie Bates with art by George Tuska. A duplicate Cosmic Boy confounds even Superboy's powers.
173, which I read a long time ago, so I don't even remember what's going on here, except that Mordru was in here, and I didn't understand what the heck was going on.
This is the Cosmic Boy meets his duplicate.
Oh, right.
And Superboy has to come back from the past to tell us which Cosmic Boy is the real Cosmic Boy.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Write that in 8 issues. And, man, I don't know what the heck's going on in this book.
Well, here's the thing. Issue 173 of Superboy is only the second issue of the Legion in their back issue status.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if it's something where, we complained about how short the backups were in action, but these are even shorter. But this story is so Carrie Bates, it hurts. You get the second person narration at the beginning where it's like, you are in Metropolis. You are not the kind of person who would be in a place like this. And then you get the whole mistaken identity thing, which is a classic Carrie Bates nonsense, and inexplicable magic for a villain. I feel like after all the trouble that they went to set up Mordru as this terrible, inexorable threat under, Shooter and Bridwell to a lesser degree.
Yeah. Now
it's just like, hey, I'm Mordru. I'm totally bad. I'm going to tell you what my total secret plan is. Nyahi, nyahi. What? Why would you tell him what your plan is, Mordru? Superboy alone could be killed, wiped out by a fake Cosmic Boy, and then he could murder his way through the Legion of Superheroes. But you've just told the most powerful member, or I should say ex-member, of the team what's going on.
Yeah, it's just more like a see if you can figure out my evil scheme. I wonder if they're not trying to make Mordru a little bit like Mr. Mxyzptlk in this series, this evil imp who pops in and says, solve my crime and say my name backwards and you will win a prize. And that's
a definite possibility.
That's kind of what this feels like, right? It's like Superboy's like, I know how to figure this out. Have you figured it out? Let's throw a couple of giant rocks down on these duplicates and see which one is the real Cosmic Boy.
And Superboy figures it out by cheating. Because the rocks aren't actually magnetic material at all. They're plastic that he painted black.
Yeah. He got out his model painting kit.
Painted black.
Yeah, got out his model painting kit and made it look like a real rock. Sure, and then Mordru was like, I cannot look at you. I've been foiled. Goodbye, everyone. And the weird thing is this is all done in 7 pages.
7 pages is a very short story. But what's more interesting to me about this issue is what doesn't happen. Which is to say, more than one actual active Legionnaire appearing doesn't happen. We get headshots at the beginning of several different Legionnaires, but literally this is all Cosmic Boy and guest star Superboy. And it makes me wonder, because, I've actually read interviews with Carrie where he talks about writing the Legion and how writing the Legion is a huge, huge pain in the paducas on occasion. But having a Legion story that features one guy, one member of a team of 35, just seems kind of like, even with only 7 pages, it seems kind of like maybe you could have used your space a little differently. I don't know.
Or gone with a different story, because I didn't like this story. I thought it was a little...
It's a watch. You wind it up and it goes. It's a really... I think that it's an economical use of 7 pages, because you can't get a lot of traction in a 7-pager. You can't do 25 characters in 7 pages. No. And you grant him that. But I feel like having Mordru do what he did is definitely sacrificing character under the wheels of this plot, the wheels of the story. And you could plug this in to pretty much anywhere. You could have made this a Justice League backup story where instead of Cosmic Boy, it's the Flash. Or you could have this be a minor X-Men story where instead of Superboy and Cosmic Boy dealing with Mordru, you've got Magneto and he's made a robot duplicate, and you have the robot duplicate of Cyclops who has to fight himself with the help of the Beast. I mean, this is kind of just a clever little plot line. You could frankly do this with a Daffy Duck comic book. So on the level of craft, I feel like it's a really good use of space. On the level of memorable, good, really awesome Legion of Superheroes moments, maybe not so much.
I was just curious because this, I think, had to have been an issue that was sitting in a drawer somewhere, because this does not feature new costumes.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. Number two, everybody knows Kung Fu. Right? I mean, actually, for a Cosmic Boy, it's Kuju or Kujai.
It's the native fighting technique on his world of
that
Braille.
He's only ever using right now, 10 years, 15 years into the run of the Legion. He's only cracking it out now.
He's always used it. He's just identifying it now. That's how comics work, dude.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, the other thing that's really weird, and I don't know if it's supposed to be a dig at Shazam or not, but Superboy says that he wishes he had the wisdom of Solomon.
I don't know if it's a dig at Shazam, because in 1971, that's right about the time that DC would have the rights to start putting out their Shazam series. I want to say their Shazam book came out in 73.
Yeah.
It may just be, one of those little things that in 1971 was just kind of a turn of phrase, and now people would only ever say it in the context of Shazam.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. I don't know. It was just very interesting that it popped out as like, wow, why would Superboy just pick the wisdom of Solomon? I guess because, Superboy was raised in a Christian environment, and they're Old Testament fans, I'm sure.
Two identical Cosmic Boys. You're kind of looking at that whole, what was the whole thing with the wisdom of Solomon? As you can tell, which parent gets the baby?
Oh, yeah. You're going to split them in half. Yeah.
Right. I'll cut them in half. No, don't do that. I think he's trying to say that this is the equivalent of splitting that baby, deciding which parent should have the child, or is really the real child's parent, or the parent's real child, the child's real parent.
I guess. I just thought it was very weak and not a very interesting story, and it's totally passable. And yeah. I think we've already spent too much time talking about this issue.
I will say this. The flashback in this issue is the most fascinating part of it, because we see Superboy joining the Legion of Superheroes, and we see him joining at a time where members of the Legion who don't even exist yet are present. So this is a Legion where he's joining. Remember, in that early issue, there were, in Adventure 247, random Legionnaires floating around. However, they were not Light Lass before Lightning Lad died, much less became Light Lass. They were not Mon-El, who Superboy actually brought out of the Phantom Zone after he joined the Legion. They were clearly not Matter Eater Lad and Colossal Boy, who joined in an issue where Superboy was already a member. So I think it's fascinating to see this flashback with either Carey or George Tuska, or both, either not knowing or not caring.
Yeah.
What the lineup of the Legion would have been in Adventure 247.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see a transition between eras of that moment where it's like, yes, this is clearly what happened in that comic. We went from no continuity to too much continuity, and now we're in an age of maybe sort of negative continuity where we reference these things, but it's only vaguely, and they couldn't actually happen the way they're being shown to us.
Yeah.
Superboy number 176, Invisible Invader. Published July 1971. Written by E. Nelson Bridwell with art by George Tuska. What will the Legion do when a villain duplicates Invisible Kid's power serum?
Superboy 176. We're back to Bridwell and back to Tuska again, who also did the previous issue. But I do like, for some reason, I like his art a lot in this issue compared to the previous issue. And I don't know why, because it's the same characters, the same drawing style. But I just like the look of the characters in this issue. Now, I do think that Mon-El is a little hunched. Every time you see him, it's almost like he's kind of stooped over, like his shoulders or his pectoral muscles weigh so much that he has to lean forward. But I dig the art in this. I even dig Mr. Smoky Man that shows up.
Mr. Smoky Man.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
He's supposed to be
invisible invader.
I think artistically for me, the real huge kind of killer moment for this issue has nothing to do with the Legion story.
Mm-hmm.
It's that beautiful cover. It's a Neil Adams photo collage.
Oh, yeah.
Of some weird small town where someone has gone and written Smallville in on the front of a building. And I'm like, I want to know where this town is, because it looks like every single town I ever lived in before I was 20.
Oh, I'm sure it's probably Kingman, Kansas or something. Who knows? Oh no, that super-brained little kook built herself a scrap iron flying carpet. How am I, Superboy, going to save the day? I know, I'll have something blow up in her face and then have aliens come down and wipe her memory. It's very much a Flowers for Algernon type story.
I don't think that's okay.
No, seriously. It's very much a Flowers for Algernon type story. Yeah. Go read it for yourself, ladies and gentlemen.
Last issue was very reminiscent, I think, of The Pit and the Pendulum, where you had two things that suck and you were stuck between them.
Yeah. So this issue introduces us to the TARDIS.
No.
Yes, it does. So here's the thing.
The multiple time cube.
Well, that's what they say. The first commercial time travel service is being introduced in this multiple time cube that has been unveiled. It's a square thing with the door on the front. And what they clearly state is that this guy jumps out of the crowd. He's been invisible. He shows up in a puff of smoke, steals the tickets, and jumps into the time machine, and he disappears. And so Chemical King is there to oversee the inaugural launch of this thing. And then when he gets back to Legion headquarters, everyone's kind of down on him for not being able to stop this invisible guy. And they're like, what happened? He goes, well, he jumped forward 1 minute in time and set the destination to Mars. And so by the time we figured it out, he was long gone. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's a time and relative dimension in space device. That's also square. That makes a funny sound as it's disappearing. And we know, as Doctor Who fans, that Doctor Who started in 1963 with the BBC, but it didn't go into circulation in the US until the 1970s. I don't have an exact date on this, but this issue came out in April of 71, or July of 71. Sorry. So do we know when Doctor Who started airing in syndication here in the United States?
I don't know.
I'm going to bet that somebody, maybe Bridwell, saw something about Doctor Who and thought this idea of a time cube that can jump in time and space was a pretty clever thing and kind of wrote it into this comic book.
Okay.
That's my guess.
It looks remarkably like an Airstream trailer of the future, which I think is hysterical.
Yeah, it's not really streamlined, though. This one's like definitely a cube as opposed to a rounded edged
It's an Airstream
device.
cube is what it is. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Also, this idea of a commercial time travel service, first thing that pops into my mind is A Sound of Thunder, which is a great science fiction story by Ray Bradbury. It came out in Collier's Magazine in June of 1959, and then collected 52, and then collected into the Golden Apples of the Sun short story collection in 1953. So just want to point that out, that this idea of time travel as a service, as a luxury, as something that people can go and do, has been around since the beginning of the Legion, really.
Yeah, possibly even before, if we're looking at 52. And I actually I'm torn on that, because when you talk about, your future story, there's always that question of how do we keep it relative? How do we keep it something that's still relatable? And being able to travel in time at will, if you're rich enough, first of all, kind of undermines a future with no money and no expectation of profit. But it also makes it really creepy and weird, because you're like, hey, where'd you go last weekend, Stephen? Oh, I was at Cleopatra's wedding in 1423.
Actually, it was way before that, but
I don't know my history. I read comic books, for God's sake.
oh yeah, you're reading comic book history, and we've seen where that's taken us before.
Exactly.
So,
Wah!
as they're trying to explain how this invisible invader guy got away, and and everyone's quizzing Chemical King, Chemical King is like, "Wait a minute, Invisible Kid, how did you get your abilities?" And we spend several pages learning about the history of Invisible Kid. So we're really getting an origin story here.
The first origin story of Invisible Kid, no less.
And we're looking at all the ways that you might be able to defeat his invisibility powers, like shooting him with an ultrasonic device or throwing dye on him or a number of other things until, boom, it clicks in everybody's mind. Now we know how to take down this invisible invader. And what better way to do it than at the intergalactic South Pole race?
Where once again, there's a super, super meaningful piston cup carved out of some sort of weird jade structure. And the guy shows up. He takes the bait. I'm invisible Cloud Boy. And he starts to run away thinking he's invisible. Turns out he's not invisible because
they figured out that, in order to become invisible, you had to inject yourself, Invisible Kid, with this chemical formula. And since this guy has all the exact powers that you do, we should get Chemical King to nullify the chemicals in this bad guy's body so that his powers don't work anymore. And you can knock him out with just one punch.
Exactly. Invisible Kid basically explains it's identical to his own serum. And a couple of important things happen here. Not only is this the first time we see the origin of Chemical King, or excuse me, the origin of Invisible Kid, we also get the moment where Chemical King's like, oh, I just figured everybody was like me. I'm a mutant. And I'm like, dude, you're in the wrong universe.
Wow. And that was really surprising, too, because it really stands out that it's clear that Chemical King sees himself as someone who hasn't gotten his powers by having his father throwing him in the microwave or having himself exposed to lead and kept alive in the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years. No, he was born with this ability.
That's
Everyone else
maybe
has been.
Maybelline.
Yeah, maybe it is. So by that process, though, if he thinks he's a mutant, Saturn Girl is also a mutant because everyone on Saturn. Well, no, she's not technically a mutant. She's just a Saturnarian.
She just has powers. The same thing with Cosmic Boy.
Same
all
way
Braillians
Colossal,
have the power.
Colossal Boy is the same way.
You could make the argument that that's true of Superman as well. It's difficult in this Superman heavy context to break down, well, what's the difference between someone like Chemical King, who's born with a weird power in a land of people that don't, and what's like the people, so many of the Legionnaires come from a planet where you have that power. Shrinking Violet comes from a planet where you just have that power. Chameleon Boy comes from a planet where you just have that power.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see this sort of, we've talked about Marvel-style storytelling coming up in the Legion. Notwithstanding the use of the word mutant here, this very much feels Marvel-style storytelling because it's, hey, Invisible Kid, you've been around for 12 years at this point.
I know, right? I was really surprised that this was the first.
We've never talked about your origin or how you got your powers or anything.
I know, right? I was really surprised that for as long as he's been around, this is the first time we see his origin story because every other character, even the ones that have shown up really, really late, even Karate Kid had an origin story before Invisible Kid.
Yeah, and Invisible Kid gets no respect. Not only that, we're like 3 or 4 years into the Chemical King business. I feel like this may be the first real time we've spent in depth with Chemical King. We've seen him pop up here and there. There was that Matter Eater Lad story where Chemical King was the rich kid and Matter Eater Lad was the kid from the wrong side of the tracks. But we haven't really gotten into his head. And this issue does actually two things that are interesting. It gives us kind of a take on Chemical King where even amongst the Legionnaires, he's like the weird rich kid that nobody gets. They don't dislike him, but he's just kind of like, oh, well, I've never really talked to my friends of 4 years about where they got their powers or anything.
Yeah.
I'm just some weirdo.
It's a little bit of a disconnect, but it also makes this fun because, when you move from a full issue to 7 to 8 page backups, You think you're really just going to get shorted and just get a bunch of really dumb, here's the setup, here's the flaw, the failings, and then the success, and then the conclusion. No, this actually has a little bit of depth to it. Knowing what I have learned in these 60 issues of the Legion Clubhouse that we've done, the team up between Invisible Kid and Chemical King never, ever happens again, right?
In this case, you're wrong.
No, I'm wrong once again. First it's Superboy Planet, then 9 Planets Pizza. I'll never get this right. Just when you think they're going to do something, they go ahead and they swerve the other direction. What do you mean that these two are going to be working together again in the future, Matthew?
Well, I'll give you half credit because technically, this is very important. Sort of, kind of, and I don't want to spoiler anything, but the next time that we see each of these guys, they kind of die. But
what?
We'll get there. It's not that far off, but this is one of the last appearances of Invisible Kid before something bad happens. I won't tell you what it is, but I already just did. And Chemical King never really recovers from Invisible Kid's death. And the weird thing about it is this story, and specifically the last panel, kind of launches 1,000 ships, because when they revamped the Legion in 1994, your Legion, the Archie Legion, or Earth 247, Invisible Kid is running around, and Invisible Kid keeps meeting Kondo Arlik, which is the real name of Chemical King in this continuity, and keeps meeting him. I believe he's either an ambassador or some sort of TV person, like an announcer, a news person, and they keep interacting. And at one point, we see a note to Invisible Kid from Kondo that says, "Can't wait to see you." And they were apparently building, according to Jeff Moy, who was the artist of the Legion, they were building towards an Invisible Kid, Kondo Arlik, who is, for all intents and purposes, Chemical King romance.
Oh, interesting.
And this is one of the only places that could come from, because this is one of the only times you see Chemical King do anything.
Well, they do exchange a meaningful glance there at the end as they're shaking hands. So
yeah, they do have kind of a, you're pretty awesome. And in 94, I kind of felt like the way the story is written, they were still kind of tiptoeing around the question of whether these Legionnaires could be into each other, or in this case, a Legionnaire and a character that we recognize as the alternate version of a Legionnaire. But I think that it's interesting to see how this story specifically, but a lot of these backup stories are very influential on future Legion tales.
Yeah.
This becomes kind of the Chemical King, Invisible Kid thing throughout that second run.
Yeah, very cool. I do have a question, though, as we wrap this issue up. Since Chemical King now knows the secret formula to make Invisible Kid invisible,
right?
If he ever got angry, could he make Invisible Kid no longer invisible? My guess is yes. And a follow-up to that is, can he give invisibility powers to everyone else?
Well, it's going to depend on the complicated nature of what Invisible Kid serum does. Because remember, Chemical King's powers are very nebulous, but they tend to be enhancing or nullifying existing chemical reactions. So I would say you're right. If you're Invisible Kid and you have that chemical serum in your blood, then Chemical Kid could trigger it to make you invisible or non-invisible. What's the opposite of invisible? Re-invisible.
Uninvisible.
Visible or invisible. There you go.
Invisible.
But in order for him to catalyze that reaction in the bloodstream of you or me or Mon-El, the actual chemical components would have to be present so that he could catalyze the reaction.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of Element Lad right then, who would actually change the chemicals in your body, or portions of the chemicals in your body, to make them. See, I'm thinking Chemical King and Element Lad are kind of the same. Also, Invisible Kid and Phantom Lass.
Phantom Girl.
Yeah, and Phantom Girl are kind of the same.
There's definitely similarities, and that's something that you get into with not just the sheer number of characters, but the piecemeal nature of the assembly of the Legion. Chemical King very much is not well thought out, because on a team where Element Lad exists, Chemical King is hard to differentiate.
Yeah.
And we see in these stories, we've seen stories where Chemical King does things that feel like they should be Element Lad's purview, and vice versa. We saw Element Lad, creating fire by messing with catalyzing elements, which should be a Chemical King thing.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's why Chemical King is A, not very often used, and B, historically one of the Legion's
Weaker members.
I was going to say casualties, but I didn't want to say it out loud. But then I remembered I just said it like 5 minutes ago. Both of these guys die in the next 10 issues. So.
Yeah, and maybe that's a way of saving Element Lad. I don't know. I don't know. I would agree with you that Chemical King maybe isn't a super great character, and Invisible Kid is safe for the dopey, I forgot to turn myself on invisible. Those kind of stupid dopey things that happen to him. I don't know. I think they're both fairly weak members because we have other characters, other members of the League or the Legion that can do the same thing. I might ask these guys to head off to the backup team, the B Squad, the substitute heroes.
Both of these guys would be and are perfect for espionage squad membership.
That would be a good thing too. That way someone could say, you could have, now picture this would be a great way to deal with these two characters besides killing them off. Mm-hmm. Publicly dismiss Invisible Kid and Chemical King from the Legion of Superheroes. Make up some thing, right? Mm-hmm. But secretly, they are part of your espionage squad. They are never seen around Legion headquarters. There's a secret underground passage that they have to get to Legion HQ or anything like that. They're only given their missions through a double cryptograph. No, a hologram.
Good evening, Mr. Norg. Your mission
from Brainiac. But here's the thing. Then you have all the bad guys going, there was somebody invisible that was this. This is Phantom Girl's doing. And they're like, no, she was off on this mission at that same time. There's no way that it could be her. There's no way that there was any Legion involvement. And so you've got, the chemical reactions changed. It had to be Element Lad. And they can go, no, Element Lad was off doing this project. Look, we have a hologram footage of him being there. There's no way he could have done any of this stuff. So they end up with this plausible deniability for any criminal that would come forward claiming that there's that the Legion of Superheroes are doing dirty tricks jobs.
Right. That would actually be an interesting take. I'd like to see that.
And secretly, they're off onto it.
1971 was many years ago.
I know, but we do have a new Legion coming up, and believe me, there's some very different looking characters on this upcoming Legion, including, depending on when you're listening to this, they've probably already been announced. Looks like there's a version of Dr. Fate on this Legion team. Mm-hmm. That's really going to be interesting. But this issue, I like this issue because we get an origin of Invisible Kid. I like that we get to see a United States version of the TARDIS. It's interesting to see that they do offer commercial time travel services in the future. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a much, much better story than Trust Me or Kill Me from Superboy 173.
I love any story that features the weirdo, quiet, never seen Legionnaires. I love a story with Shrinking Violet. I love a story where Matter Eater Lad is front and center. So yeah, this is one of my favorites of the backup era because Invisible Kid's been around forever, but partly because he's invisible, never really gets any play. He doesn't get to go out and punch people in the face necessarily. And Chemical King, they are clearly realizing, has been around now for 3 years, hasn't really done anything. So I like the fact that this story is all about the nerds, to the point where Cosmic Boy and Ultra Boy see, the nerds are working. We're just going to dip out. They're in like a panel, and Mon-El is like, all right, I'm your leader. And they're like, oh, well, you have this covered. We'll just see ourselves out.
Yeah.
They went to the 9 Planets ice cream parlor.
No, it's never been seen again. That wraps it up for another installment of the Legion Clubhouse. Matthew, what did we learn this week?
We learned that we are now firmly in the era of the Legion that is most important throughout the history of the Legion, and that, my friends, is the era of the Legion in which you and I were born.
I think we also learned this week that just because you're invisible, or just because you have the same powers as someone else, doesn't mean you can't provide valuable input to a mission.
And we've once again learned that the science police change their helmets often, but they're always styling.
Thanks again for checking us out this week. We will be back next time to explore more issues of the Legion of Superheroes. Until then, I'm Ladman, Boy King Kid.
And I'm Unpossible Boy Girl.
The Legion Clubhouse is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by Steven Schleicher. Your hosts were Matthew Peterson and Steven Schleicher. You can follow Matthew at Mighty King Cobra and Steven at Major Spoilers. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at Legion Clubhouse. If you have questions or comments, send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I'm Jason Inman. Until next time, eat it, Grandpa.